Right.
Okay,
We can start.
we're going to go ahead and start over. It sounds like we were on mute. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to open the meeting. Welcome, everyone, to the regular monthly meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board. I keep looking over at the screen, but I guess the cameras are here. So anyway, my name is Cynthia Kress, and I'm currently serving as the chair. Before we begin, I just wanted to thank Tisha for being here tonight. And we're going to go ahead and move right on to minutes. I have the agenda on my phone. I'm not looking at texts. And I am seeking approval of the October minutes by unanimous consent as presented. And hearing no objection, minutes are approved as presented. I was distracted by the arm wave over there by Dave.
No, I was trying to get David's attention.
Okay. So let's see. So the next on the agenda is public comment. It sounded like there was possibly somebody who was intending to come to make a public comment, but was not able to get the right information at the right time. Oh, thank you. But it looks like that might be the same person that's on the screen. So, you know, if we have any other one else that wanted to make a public comment that is confused about the location?
Not that it contacted me.
Not that you're aware of.
Of course,
Okay.
I'm at the center of the universe.
Sure.
This time.
So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and keep public comment in order. But if, because the website was down, if there's somebody who joins us later, we can open that up again for public comment later on. But at this point, I'd like to go ahead and open it up for public comment. It sounds like, looks like we've got a couple of folks. Connie, were you going to make a public comment? Okay.
Yes, then I will be unmuting David Kapler.
Oh, I thought we were going to start with her.
She was.
Yes, sorry. Can we go ahead and start with you?
Okay, where do I go?
Well, I don't know, this is a new room for us, and you're the first actual public commenter that we've had since.
I would say up here, we're gonna get a podium, but for now, if you wanna come right up here, and this owl
That's
will
where
pick
the-
up your mic.
The camera will
Yes.
Thank you.
pick me up
We'll
and
make sure.
everything. Okay, my name's Connie Marsh, and I live on Issaquah. And step one, most public comment in the city is 5 minutes. It's 3 for you all. And I cannot speak in 3 minutes to intensely complex things like your tonight's agenda. So I would ask that you actually add to your changes for your rules and regulations a 5-minute public comment period. And now I'm going to do a mad dash through your tonight's typologies. So I don't see how your typologies interface with the central Issaquah plan that was creating a walkable downtown with basically a 250-foot grid where people could get across the streets and minimizing the amount of asphalt on several of the streets. You're at 1,500-foot grid and then some at 2,000-foot grids for trying to get across the street. This is not going to work. It also has parking on each side of the road, and some of those road prisms are 84 feet. And so we are trying to get rid of surface parking in our central Issaquah area, and this is actually adding. So I did ask the question about the EIS that we had for the central Issaquah plan and to whether these correlate. This did not go to the Parks Department or the Parks Board, though it seems to be heavily interfaced with the Green Necklace. It was unclear to me how this plan was actually threading through the Parks Department, who's responsible for the Green Necklace, to give them a say on what success would be. I also did not understand how the dedicated transit lanes were threaded through the presentation. Now maybe that's going to become clear. And then there were things like we now have a 2-lane road going over the Holly Street Bridge, which was turned into a pedestrian bridge after being a road bridge. And so I'm concerned that this is going to create, again, a road or bus bridge in the Holly Street Bridge area by creating a road typology that is basically 2 car lanes instead of a ped bridge. And so it's things like that that concern me to some extent. Some things were not mentioned, like Sunset Way, Mountain Park Boulevard, 12th. And these are all streets that have difficulties and the city doesn't really know what they're supposed to be. So we have a hard time improving them because we don't have a plan for them. So I was curious why some of these seemingly more major streets that don't have a plan were left out of the typologies. And so that is probably as much as you all can absorb, but I just don't see how this is working for what our town plans are. So maybe that will become clear. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So, looks like we have another interested member of the public, David Kepler. I'm assuming you're here to make public comment?
You can speak now, David.
Thank you for being here.
Okay. Am I being heard now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Part of the transportation system in some cases is the trail system. And I'm concerned about well, if you were near Victoria in the last 2 years, you know the disruption that the Mountain Sound Greenway Trail caused as it was built in that area. Fortunately, in Issaquah, it's simpler, but we do need to expect that it's going to be a busy a trail that people will be trying to get to the Westlake Sammamish, in some cases, certainly trying to get to the Preston part of it and extensions to the east, and then of course to the East Lake Sammamish Trail. Some of the models have shown that trail being on Newport in the area of the Tibbetts Valley Park. Actually the road, the right of way there is less than it is on Maple. And to try and get some of the other improvements, plus the trail on that side, the large row of trees on the north edge of the park are doomed. I don't want to see those trees taken out, and I think the community would be kind of outraged if they did. So how we work on getting that onto Maple in that section, I think needs to be considered. Maple already has a widened sidewalk on its north side, so it actually works well to then connect to the trail. Behind, if you're trying to get more to the east, the existing trail, it comes up behind the retail area where REI, Safeway, and Target are. So there's some real issues there we have to work on to figure out that trail. And also there's some issues on how we get people over to the Bergsma property and access Cougar Mountain in a safe manner as well. From we expecting with the big sale pitch on that was that people from the region would come by bus to the transit center and then go hiking on 3,000 acres of Cougar Mountain. And we need to be able to come out a way to get those people safely over across 900, across Newport to the trail system on Cougar. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Kepler, for your comments. Do we have anybody else in public comment that we're aware of?
No, I don't see anyone wanting to submit public comments.
So that brings us to 4A, which is our regular business, and we're going to talk a little bit about the amendments to the rules and regulations that govern the this board, and just kind of highlight the 35,000 foot level. The board itself is, I never would quite know where to look. Am I looking right at the owl? Am I looking at the owl? Yeah. The formation of the board is is in code, but that allows us as a board to make certain decisions about the day that we meet, and I think a handful of other smaller decisions. And so we're considering moving our regular monthly meeting date, which is an authority that we as a board have in the formation document, the formation code. Yeah. Anyway, so at this point, I will turn it over to Tisha, who's going to talk to us about that, and we can see if we're ready to make any decisions.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Tisha Geezer, the city clerk, and I've met most of you before, but not all of you, so nice to see you. As the chair said, I'm here to talk to you about two potential changes to your rules. So the municipal code specifies that the Transportation Advisory Board can adopt its own rules to dictate certain processes. They're not too lengthy. They're only about 6 pages long. But tonight we're going to talk about two things that are encompassed by them, your regular meeting date and then virtual attendance. So I understand that there is a commissioner who has an ongoing conflict with your regular meeting date. And so we have looked at some other possible meeting dates. The city is short on meeting space right now. And so this room is used by 4 other boards. And then we also just try and avoid having boards meet at the same nights as city council meetings and other groups that might cover similar topics. So we don't have a lot of alternatives, but we did want to share with you 2 possibilities, which are the 2nd Monday of each month and the 4th Wednesday of each month. This room is available. There aren't really any other regular meeting conflicts. And so this is something you can talk about. My presentation is really short, and then we're not, the city is neutral on this topic, but obviously you're gonna wanna find a date that works for most of you on an ongoing basis. So that's something that you can choose to amend, or you can choose to leave your current 3rd Thursday in place. And then I also wanted to talk to you about a potential virtual attendance policy. So during COVID-19, so the Transportation Advisory Board is a board that has to abide by the state's Open Public Meetings Act rules. And an aspect of those rules is that any OPMA group has to have a physical meeting space. It's really about trying to ensure maximum access to government meetings. And so during COVID-19, the governor issued a proclamation waiving that. However, the proclamation was lifted, and then the state has lifted their COVID-19 emergency as well. The city does still have, has a declared emergency in place for COVID-19. But we're transitioning back to in-person meetings. You know this, you've been meeting in person since September. But we've been getting some feedback from the board and commissioners. So while we asked you board and commission members to come back in person, obviously we've retained this WebEx virtual meeting element for the public and for staff, and we are hearing that board and commissioners would like the option to attend virtually too. And we've had, like Micah, we've had other boards, we've had members who just for some reason can't attend in person, join this way, but your rules don't say anything about it. And so this draft policy puts a few provisions around it. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it, but the high points are, what we're proposing is that you would still have a quorum, so that's a majority plus 1. You're a 9-member board, if I'm remembering right. So that means we would be hoping to have 5 of you in person, but then the other 4 could reach out to Isabel and explain why you might like to attend the meeting virtually. There's some examples in the policy. The policy is really still geared to getting you in person. I know the mayor feels that it's important, particularly when we have residents coming in person to talk to these boards, to have some people to look at and talk with. So you'll see the policies emphasizing use the virtual attendance if you are on a business trip. If you have some medical situation and getting out of the house and in a car is going to be difficult for you. If you have a transportation issue, it's not intended to be used as a substitute for coming in person ever. Or we don't want you participating in the meetings virtually when you're on vacation with your family. Please just request an excused absence. It's not a reason for you to be at every meeting always. So that's kind of the direction we're recommending with the virtual attendance policy, but you can choose to make it more open-ended, more flexible if you would like. One more comment on that. If we have technology issues and we don't have 5 individuals in person, we would need to end the meeting. which is one of the reasons we also were recommending that be a requirement. So if there's a technology issue, the board could still meet. However, I think we promote this virtual attendance option to the public and post your meeting links. And so I think that we would, particularly on a high profile item, we would maybe consider doing, continuing the meeting or delaying it if we had technology issues. Thankfully, we have not had any major technology issues thus far. A few other provisions I want to mention is that if you're attending virtually, we are really looking for engagement. And so cameras on, still participating, the rules, the draft rules don't limit you. Participate in discussion, you would be able to vote attending virtually. But we are recommending that whoever chaired the meeting be in person. So if you were attending virtually, we would ask the vice chair or another member to chair in your place. And then there are some other small changes to the rules to acknowledge the virtual public participation. And there's just a little bit of language to acknowledge that and being proposed, acknowledging that your regular meetings will have this virtual component. We've been doing that. This will make it more formal. I do think you might occasionally have a special meeting. If you ever decided to take a tour, do something like a sort of a social gathering, we probably would not be offering a virtual element to that. So that's why that language is specific to your regular meetings. And then also adding some clarification that staff may attend virtually like they are tonight. So your options are to adopt these proposed rules as presented. You could choose to modify any aspects of this. Again, that meeting date question is out there if you'd like to consider a change to your regular meeting date. And you certainly don't need to make any of these decisions tonight as well. You could also choose to continue the conversation. So with that, I am done and welcome to answer any questions.
Do you guys have any questions for her?
Not a question, but it sounds like the direction and the path is really to be full-time in-person meetings again. I'm good.
But recognizing and allowing for virtual attendance as needed, so, and again, if you, but yes, with an emphasis on attending in person.
I have a question. Is there any reason we can't consider removing public comment to 5 minutes in this?
No.
In this same?
No, in fact, that is a section of the rules that, we're proposing some changes to, so it's perfectly appropriate to make other amendments to these sections tonight if you'd like.
So how about if we take them one at a time? And then would we be aiming to make a motion at, if we're ready to make a motion, all one at a time, or should we make it all in one?
Well, it depends. You could take that meeting date first, amendment first,
And if we are ready to make a decision, are you recommending that we do one at a time in each individual motion?
I would do the regular meeting date in one motion and then the virtual attendance policy in the
And then
second
if we
motion.
also want to make a motion about the public comment, we could, so it's 3 separate motions.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it could be done different ways if there's, but 3 separate motions.
Okay. Okay.
That works
Okay.
well.
So I guess I just want to open it up to, let's start with the meeting date. If we could open it up, does anybody have an opinion? And I do have one, but I'm not going to go first. So about whether you are open to changing it. If so, is there a date on there? And we thought about this for a while and realized that it's within this board's authority to change it at any time. I don't think it's really wise to change it constantly. But we do have some flexibility, and we do not have a really robust list. I think we actually have 8 regular members, 1 vacancy, and all 3 of our alternates are vacant. So we are really wanting to hold tight to the fabulous folks that are serving on this board. Luckily, we have 8 fantastic board members. So that, at any point, the board can make the change, and I don't think anybody thinks it's a good idea to change whenever, willy-nilly, but this seemed like an appropriate time to at least discuss it. So does anybody want to open up with any kind
Sure, start. I'm okay with changing the date. Wednesdays work well for me. Mondays are a little more difficult. I'm okay with that. Either way.
We'll just go real quick.
I'll second that. I will also second that Mondays can happen, but I feel like, I think I've said this before, with the way the packet rolls out. I guess I give myself more time if it's kind of midweek to check it out versus if it comes out, I do it over the weekend, but not necessarily. We'll sit down and do it.
Fourth Wednesday.
I'm actually fine with a fourth Wednesday.
Okay. I overlooked that I have had a standing meeting for 20 years on the second Monday, and I do not know how that escaped me, but I'm so glad I didn't have that. Well, pardon? Micah?
Micah.
Sorry.
Hi, Micah, go ahead.
Hi. So yeah, but both Mondays and Wednesdays work well for me. I'd be happy to do either.
Thank you. And please help me if I keep forgetting the one person that's not in the room. It'll just take a little getting used to be hybrid here, but so I could use a little assistance. So thank you, Micah. Well, with that, I would entertain a motion to move our regular meeting to the fourth Wednesday.
Also, just say if Monday isn't ideal because a lot of the, holidays.
I have the same problem with Mondays.
Did you make the motion or you want to entertain?
I don't think chairs are supposed to.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that we change our meeting date to the fourth Wednesday of the month.
I'll
Second motion or?
Yeah, is that starting December?
Just wondering that
Oh.
exact same thing.
Or should we just start June?
January seems like an awfully nice time to start.
Yeah, that'd be,
Yeah, are we gonna really meet in
that'd
December?
be next week, so. So start it in December.
Correct.
Would we start in
You
December?
can discuss,
Should I-
but one thing I would remind is that if we start in December, it would lie, I think, on December close to,
Christmas.
I think it's the
Yes.
28th.
so it'll be a
of
tough, but, yeah,
Micah
I'll
has,
let you,
Micah has.
I think
Okay.
technically,
and I think Micah has.
there's a motion on the table. Technically, the discussion of when it starts is separate, but obviously it's salient, and this is not, so
Okay,
maybe we wanna,
For the next meeting, that would make December on the 28th. That would be December.
it's not a great attendance week. We are conflating, we are bringing a new thing into a motion that's already been made, so someone either needs to withdraw the motion and remake it, just technically, just practicing here.
Yes, but also I'd say if you're determining that when it'd be effective, I think that
Can be,
works. It can be an element of this
okay,
motion that you have in front of you is when it would become effective. Right? If
Yes.
that's what you're talking about. Is it effective now or do you want to make
Right.
it effective January 1st?
but if somebody's made a motion and we haven't addressed when it starts, do we need to revise, withdraw and start
You
over?
could amend the motion, and so maybe once you settle on something, you could restate what you understand the group to be supporting, and then we'll consider that the motion that you're voting on.
Okay. I'm just trying to practice being technical. I'm not sure it amounts to all that much meaningful difference, but
Or
it's
you're
just,
asking if we can just withdraw the motion and you're
Let's do
saying
that.
just withdraw the motion.
would you be willing to withdraw the motion so we can make one? Okay.
Madam Chair, I'd be willing to withdraw the motion and make a new motion when it comes time.
I think we might be ready now for that. Sounds like we all want January.
So let's,
Before
Sorry.
Micah has a comment.
Sorry, Micah. Please, go ahead, Micah.
For what it's worth, I think the motion didn't actually specify when it started, so it's withdrawn now. It's sort of beside the point, but the motion wasn't specifically we're going to start in December with this schedule. It was just that they'd moved to a different date, so you could still decide that after. I mean, it's been withdrawn, but
Yeah, I agree with you. I just didn't want to make us think that we'd made a motion that included January, the start date in it. Anyway, I think it sounds like everyone's okay with starting in January and everyone's, so I think we're ready to go ahead and do that. I get your point, Micah.
so the motion would be to change the date starting in the month of,
January, not December.
Correct.
Okay. Madam Chair, I move that we change our meeting date to the fourth Wednesday of the month, beginning in January 2023.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Anyone opposed? All right, it carries
So,
unanimously.
Michael, were you opposed or for when your hand went up?
I think it was 4.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on to the next. So I actually wouldn't mind taking the length of public comment next, only because it might be shorter, and then we might have a little more to say about the virtual attendance, unless Tisha, you disagree with that.
No.
Okay, so I think that if there are people that want to talk for 5 minutes, we can afford that, and I think if we do, when we often have really complex things, so I would like to bring it to you all and see how you feel about that. Generally, opening it up to see if anyone has any comments about entertaining that idea.
It's a good idea.
Well, hearing nobody seem to be uninterested, I would entertain a motion to change our public comment duration from 3 to 5 minutes.
So, question, if there is a certain number of people, do we bring it back down to 3 minutes if you have like 20 people to comment?
Thought about that, and I think that what we have to do is cross that bridge when we come to it, and because I think it becomes a little more complex if we have some kind of sliding scale depending on time, and I think that our history since we started this board suggests that won't be a problem, and if it does become a problem, I think we can revisit it at that point. That's my opinion. I guess I'm not looking over there, but you are, so I'm gonna keep looking at you. Go ahead, Mike.
I mean, is there any reason we can't have some sort of a hard cap on total public comment time of something really high, 30 minutes or something, just so that we don't possibly get in a situation? I don't know how it would happen if we're going to make the change in the rule.
I don't know if it's possible, but I'm gonna make an argument that says, if we have something that's that hot, maybe we need to revisit our schedule and listen to what people have to say. Please, yes.
And one of the proposed amendments tonight was to kind of clarify that the chair has the discretion to make exceptions to either currently the 3 minutes, or if you change it to something else, or impose an overall maximum. To your point, Micah, if you anticipated a really high amount of public comment, but also had a decision to make at one of your meetings, you could, indicate on the agenda that you'd be taking 30 minutes of public comment and then divide that by the number of folks.
And we could make that decision in the moment, in the situation.
With this proposed change, and actually the rules even now allow for that. There's a note next to the comment limit that says, or such other time limit as imposed at the discretion of the chair. So I think you have some flexibility built in here.
That sounds,
That's any particular meeting that.
That's any particular meeting.
Micah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, what Cynthia said made sense, and I guess retract what I said earlier. I think if we have 30 minutes of public comment or 40 minutes, there's probably a reason for it, and so we should be listening to that and prioritizing it.
I would entertain a motion to change from 3 to 5.
I move we change our public comment per person to 5 minutes from 3 minutes. I'm saying that right.
A second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, the motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll go back to the topic of virtual. I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions about that or any comments they want to make before we are making a decision.
So for me, this is a pretty big matter because my job is bulky residing in Issaquah during weekdays. My permanent residence is here, I'm home on weekends, but for the legislative session, I live down in during. So I'm hoping that doesn't create issues, but it would be great to be able to remote in with advance notice. So allowable for the months of January.
That's good to know. Thank you for mentioning that. Looking over here. Anybody else have anything they want to share about this? Okay, go ahead, Dave.
This has been a big topic, not just for this board, but I sit on a lot of boards. And one thing that I've seen that's been really positive, this is the most wonderful thing that we've been given through the pandemic, not only to be able to do this, but I totally agree. Just had a King County Veterans Advisory Board meeting this morning, and nobody showed up. So I was gonna jump in the car and go in there. That's a long way, okay? Didn't, got online, but I'm believing that we should now say, pandemic's over, let's do what we did before and come back and use the virtual as a backup, not as the mode that we're meeting. Because we can get so much more out of meeting in person. And voting on, tougher to vote online than it is. So my belief is it's excellent. And we've had the city council come back into meeting in person. I say there's no reason that we shouldn't be in. That's the second time today I've said that. There's no reason that we shouldn't be in person. Unless there's something.
Yeah, and I think if we have this, it's just like what you were just saying, if we know ahead of time, that's gonna be a time period, can be remote for 3 months. I mean, that's perfect planning. It's not like, I'm not gonna show up today. I think that's like, there's a real situation and there's a real time frame, and that's, to me, is perfectly okay, I think.
So I feel like it allows
Virtual side.
to cast it for like recruitment purposes or retention, if you're a working parent or something. It's happened. I don't have kids, but I imagine scenarios that this will make it easier to retain a diverse body of folks that we might want on this board and any board in the city.
I think for another example is the discussion we had at the last meeting, which is like great with people here talking and just having a discussion as we're going through and getting opinions and thoughts. And that just comes about every year in person, I think.
I don't think do we get to choose whether it's required, is it required that we have 5?
No, you really have flexibility here. We need a room open to the public. You could have Isabel. We wouldn't want her to have to be here by herself, but technically Isabel could be here and you all could be virtual. We're not recommending that, but you do have flexibility under Washington state law, yes.
So I'm inclined, I too really think that being in person is just so much better. And I think we all did a really good job over the last couple of years of adapting, but I'm just so happy to be back in person. Things happen, people can't make, I think that my personal opinion is that we should give this a try to see if we can consistently have a quorum of 5. And also what it does, we've been together for a while now, and I think have built some trust, and I think we can hold each other accountable. Now we know that we kind of need to be here if we can be here. We've got people who can't be here, and you're a very valued member of this board, and you have a very specific and obviously important job. And so I feel fine about having that extra obligation to make sure that I've got my, rear end in the seat, and that's what we hopefully will be able to do for each other. So there's a little bit of trust, and relying on each other. Go ahead.
Is there an option for time also?
To move the time?
Not like 30 or 6:30 to 8, or just keep it 6 to 8?
Oh, that's also within your discretion. Can't think of a practical, most of the boards, just if that's helpful, most of the city's boards begin, the earliest begins at 5:30. Most of them tend to fall closer to 6:30, or even 7 o'clock.
I prefer the 6, to tell you the truth, because by 8 o'clock,
At 6.
I can't
Yes.
function.
Okay, well, I mean, now's a convenient time to revisit that, but if we have some kind of consistent hiccup, we can revisit it really at any time, it sounds like. Yeah, I also really like the idea that the staff doesn't have to come. I mean, I know it sounds like one person, the liaison has to come here, but it's really nice to be able to get different people that can participate in our meetings. It looks like we've got Andrea. Oops, wait. So I think it's really great. If people can make presentations, because it's really us to be talking to each other, and that's really valuable. But I think it's, I am supportive of staff. We want to do anything we can to make these jobs that people want, so we attract the best talent. And being able, that's a nice perk, and I don't think it detracts as much. I think being here and deliberating with each other is really key. So with that, I would entertain, I think where we're netting out is to adopt as recommended, and maybe it would be helpful to switch. Micah, you didn't raise your hand, but did you have anything else you wanted to add? Okay. So maybe we could call up that slide and somebody could make a motion to, I would entertain a motion to make the changes that staff is recommending, because I'm finding myself agreeing with them. I'm just looking at that. Can the motion be that? Yes, that says proposed motion, and then there's, those references would then be noted?
So the first motion here, you've
We already
already
did,
taken
right,
care
but the
of. So
second
the
one?
second one would be adopting the rules as proposed, incorporating the changes you've already made.
And I'm just asking a technical question, so somebody can make that motion as that language, and then would it then be in the record what they're referring to? Because obviously you need the reference.
Yes, yeah, this was in your agenda packet, so
Right.
yes.
Sorry, the motion, but we're the virtual attendance policy, is that what the motion is for?
That's, yes.
Okay. I guess for the motion to approve the virtual attendance policy as discussed.
And I second it.
All in favor? Any discussion rather, sorry. No discussion, all in favor? Aye. All right, the motion carries unanimously. Good, that's good. It's good to revisit our nuts and bolts every now and again.
Yes. If we're, like, are we actively recruiting alternates or anything, just for, since we aren't at such a,
We're not taking off cycle. Her question was, are we actively recruiting alternates? We're not, we've not been invited to ask for off-cycle board recruitment, but we all should be thinking about who might recruit to ask. I think the applications are due in February. So I think we should all be thinking about people, and I know I have been reached out to a few people, haven't gotten super far, but really think now about people we might want to get to apply in February. So we're actually doing okay. I mean, it'd be nice to have every seat filled, but I think a lot of boards I've been told that a lot of boards are struggling being fully filled. So at least we still are able to get a quorum every time. We've got a fantastic group of people, but we obviously want to keep people in the pipeline and make sure the board stays full and healthy. And alternates make it much easier to make that 5-person quorum, right? The alternate can be
Yes, and
one of the 5.
I didn't iterate this, but the rules you just approved do say that if you have 2 or more vacancies on the board, then there can be an exception to that 5 people in person.
Okay.
So that is still your quorum. So again, if there's a technical issue, the meeting would have to stop, but recognizing if you end up with only 5 members for some reason, you could still have some.
Right now we're at 8. If we drop to 7, a quorum would now be 4.
Your quorum is fixed, so your quorum stays 5 as long as we have a 9-member transportation advisory board, regardless of the number of vacancies.
Oh, even if there's vacancies, I see.
Yes, the
Okay.
quorum is fixed, but the policy is
I
recognizing,
see.
if for some reason you get down to 5 members, we still want you to be able to attend virtually. So there's a little flexibility if you have vacancies on your board, 2 or more vacancies, which it sounds like you have.
No, we only have one.
You have
vacancy.
one alternate. Okay.
No, I'm sorry. We have 3 alternates vacant and 1 regular vacancy.
Okay, so you essentially have 4 vacancies.
Okay,
We didn't get that specific, but I
Okay.
would consider that to be 4 vacancies.
gotcha. Okay, that's helpful.
And Madam Chair, one of the things I think we also got to look at least I did on the cemetery board, when the terms expire. Because I know that that's going to make sometimes we let that go and then next thing we know, we're December, January timeframe. We got terms
Yeah, thank you for
expiring.
reminding me. Let's make sure that everyone who has an expiring term this coming spring is aware before the February deadline. If we can, could I ask, is that something I can ask you to do, just to remind them? Okay.
Usually in the notes, it used to be in the cemetery board, remind me, Tish, because I forgot. But I think in the cemetery board, we actually had the year next to our name. So that we
It's on the
knew,
website.
It's on the website.
yeah,
It's there.
I didn't go there right now, but I really think that's important because as chair of the cemetery board, I got some of those folks who dropped off and then all of a sudden you're meeting and you're looking at a vacancy and you go, oh, wow, we better tend to that now rather than wait. Just something I learned.
Noted, thank you. Yeah, so hopefully the people that are, hopefully people whose terms are up this coming cycle will be interested in reapplying because I think we're just really getting going and really starting to work pretty well as a group. So that would make me happy if people are interested in re-upping. And if not, yikes, we got some more work to do in recruitment. Okay, well, is there anything else on item 4A? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to 4B, and I believe we have Thomas, and it looks like we've got Mr. John Larson Friend, and I'm not sure who I'm turning this over to.
Thomas Walters.
Okay. And you guys are welcome to come and join once, maybe in person, so we get to meet you in person, but we don't want you to think we don't want you to come. We just want to make sure that you have an attractive job so that you keep doing it. Go ahead.
Appreciate it. Can you guys hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. Good to see you. My name is Thomas Valdrez, and I'm the city's senior transportation planner. Tonight, I'll be providing an update on the street standards project. Then I'll walk through the administration's proposal to introduce a set of citywide street typologies, and then ask for the board's feedback. Lastly, I'll conclude by providing an update on what's next. So before I begin, just wanted to pause here and share with you the questions that staff will be asking the board. So the first question is, do the proposed street typologies adequately address the gaps identified between existing planning documents? Do the proposed typologies implement the guiding principles of the mobility master plan? Does the board support increasing minimum bike lane widths from a minimum of 5 foot to 6 feet? Does the board support the location of bike lanes along core streets and parkways? Should staff develop options that involve widening the street typology, that do not involve widening the street typology cross sections while also meeting multimodal objectives? And lastly, does the board have any general feedback on the citywide street typologies? So I will show these again later on, but these are the main questions that just to keep in mind as I go through this presentation. So as I mentioned in June, when I introduced the street standards to the board, The street standards are providing guidance for the design and construction of public streets and other elements in the public right-of-way. The standards typically are updated on an as-needed basis, and the last update was made in 2010. We're now in phase 2 of this project, where we're drafting the revised street standards and their associated engineering details. And in phase 3, we'll be further revising the code based on the feedback that we're given. Finally, we expect to adopt the updated street standards along with Title 18 by spring or summer of next year. So as I also mentioned at the TABS June meeting, I sort of introduced what the functional classification system is. And so just to reiterate that, the Federal Highway System of Functional Classification is an ordering system that categorizes streets based on their ability to move traffic and provide access to adjacent properties. So just created this chart to sort of help the visual learners understand sort of what the differences are between different street types in the functional classification system. And just to provide a little bit more background, every street in the city is required to be classified. And examples of classifications include arterials, collectors, and local streets, to name a few. So the top third of this chart, we have arterial streets. And the gray section represents mobility, like how much traffic is able to function on that street. And the green section is more about access. So in the top third, we can see arterial streets. They're designed to be to move a lot of traffic, and they don't allow for very much access to abutting properties. And SR 900 is an example of this type of street. Collectors in the middle represent a more balanced approach of providing access and traffic. And at the bottom of the spectrum, we have local streets, which focus more on providing access to properties. And residential streets are an example of this type. The specifications in each of these classifications are found in the Public Works Street Standards. And then just sort of looking at a more holistic approach, as we consider the functional classification system, the measures that are included tend to primarily focus on the needs of motor vehicles, and depending on the street's local context, may place less design emphasis on the needs of other modes, such as pedestrians or cyclists. And so the street typologies, which I'm talking about today, recognize the difference between the needs of these other types of modes for pedestrians, cyclists, and transit, and provide that design flexibility based on the local context and the user needs. Both of it are really may not be adequately addressed within the functional classification system. Many communities, such as ours, have already taken steps towards our commitment to complete streets through the adoption of street typologies. Factors within this classification system include the street classification, such as the functional classification system, the way that the street is used, the built environment context, and the modal priorities. These are all things that are factored into the typology. The central Issaquah plan, which formalizes the community's vision for that neighborhood, currently uses a street typology system. So this is a local example of when we have used that. Within the central Issaquah plan, it includes 5 types, which are core streets, parkways, boulevards, neighborhood streets, and pedestrian priority streets. These streets are the basis of the development of these citywide street typologies, which I will be discussing very soon, and were approved upon to better align our street designs across the whole city in alignment with our community's multimodal goals. And just to provide some more detail, I do apologize, this is a very heavy hitter of a topic. During the process of updating Title 18, The administration identified the need to piece together the requirements from other foundational documents. When put all together, they really create disconnects that don't actually make any sense. So it's really about putting together all these foundational documents and making sure that the disconnects are refined in order to be consistent with each other and also constructible. The documents shown on this slide contribute to that vision for the multimodal, for a multimodal city. These documents include the Central Issaquah Plan, the Park Strategic Plan, which provides a regional trails vision, also known as the Green Necklace Vision, the Complete Streets Code, and the Mobility Master Plan, which feeds into the Comprehensive Plan. So in summary, the proposed citywide street typologies are an attempt to bridge these disconnects between all these documents in order to be more explicit about the way that we want to design roads, and also to make sure that our modal priorities are being expressed on individual streets all across the city. And this slide just shows a high-level overview of how the typologies are aligned with the guiding principles of the Mobility Master Plan, which this board is, is the point on for that. So in summary, the typologies incorporate complete streets design principles that follow that provide safe and accessible connections for all travel modes that benefit folks of all ages, abilities, incomes, and backgrounds. Streets will be designed in part based on their land use context and user needs. Many of the street designs are transit supportive, pedestrian oriented, and close gaps in the regional trails network. These designs promote regional connectivity, sustainable transportation options, and support anticipated growth. The design and associated materials would be simple to install and easy to maintain, which is important when considering the long-term costs of maintaining the streetscape. In summary, the citywide street typologies that I'm showing you tonight are aligned with the intent of the Mobility Master Plan. So with all that background information, I'm now going to walk you through the typologies, which are available to you in attachment E of your packet. And so the first type is called core streets. Core streets are streets that serve medium to high density mixed use and commercial districts. Core streets prioritize destinations over through traffic and facilitate access to land use where transportation modes mix and connect with others. Core streets accommodate multimodal access to surrounding land uses by providing both on-street parking and wide sidewalks. They include bike facilities that are separated from the roadway with a landscape buffer and include bike racks and other street amenities. Core streets also include transit supportive design elements such as lane widths and intersection designs that accommodate standard buses, space for bus shelters, and other types of amenities. And here's that cross-section of the citywide street typology. And in comparing the citywide typology with the central typology, which this is based off of, the administration is proposing moving the bike lane to be adjacent to the sidewalk. So with this design, cyclists would be separated from pedestrians and would also be located away from parked vehicles and passenger vehicles. Bike lanes are proposed to be 1 foot wider than the existing design, which calls for a 5 foot width. And travel lanes for vehicles would also be 1 foot wider, which is meant to accommodate the width of a bus. Core streets are really only relevant in the central Issaquah area. The net result is that the new core street design would be about 4 foot wider than the older central Issaquah design. And doing that, adding that 4 feet is really about better aligning the street with the multimodal goals. So the second type is called parkways. Parkways prioritize vehicle and transit mobility between neighborhoods and communities.
You
And this is to connect with, excuse me.
Thomas, can you? I just wanted to, there's a lot of material here. Did you have any questions before we move to the next one? Any questions for him?
I'll save mine for seeing.
Okay. There's a lot to take in. I just wanted to pause and see if they had any questions. But it looks like no, we don't. So carry on. Thank you.
I just,
Okay.
can I just
Sorry,
one thing?
wait, we do. Yes, go ahead.
A good thing would be when you do a course street, give us an example of a course street.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
helpful.
you can put up the design, that's fine. I pretty much know, but when you say a course street is Gilman Boulevard, or give us an example.
Yeah, I would echo that. And we don't have the ability to toggle back and forth between the map that shows where these all are. So any little tips you could give us to help us follow along with regard to specifics, that would be very helpful. Thanks. I had the same thought, but didn't think to say it at this time.
And it gets even smaller when you're looking at this.
Yeah.
Sure thing. Would it be helpful to, I have that map later on in the presentation, so I can toggle between those if that's helpful. Otherwise, maybe I could just,
Helpful. Well, it did review it, but I didn't commit it to memory, so.
yeah, I'm happy to do whatever the board would like.
Maybe at logical points, maybe before, at the beginning and the end, show us the map so we can really get oriented that way.
So for example, with this one, just where these streets would be, and then come back and start the presentation.
Yeah, so both examples and toggle back and forth. I know that might take a little extra time, but I think it'll save the time in the long run.
So the beauty of being remote is that I have another screen here. I can pull the map and go in between.
Excellent.
Okay, so this is that core street.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is the blue is the core streets.
That's Maple.
Yeah, I remember looking at that.
Yeah.
So Newport isn't a course street, but it would be, but that's okay.
So it's
Show
like
classification.
7th Avenue, and it was hard to figure out which streets though were. Yes. You go to Google Maps, I guess.
So I think if I may, maybe it would be, I can just flash this and then maybe talk about some of the streets. So all these streets within central Issaquah, these, the core streets here, and this is what is talked about in attachment F. These are all, for the most part, they're providing clarification for streets that were not previously defined in central Issaquah. But for the most part, the core streets are consistent. Not much change has been involved. So I invite you to look at attachment F as I go through this, and maybe that would kind of explain some of the changes that were made as well.
I think one of the problems is that we've returned to in person, but back in the old days, we didn't actually bring our computers, and there were usually printed materials, and so we would flip back and forth between pages. And some of us are looking at our phones now, and I'm making a note to myself to bring my, bring some kind of device next time so I can follow along a little more. But to and I guess also maybe this is a little bit out of order, but these materials did come to us pretty late in the cycle. And I think all of us did as best we could to catch up, but it was a lot of material that was dumped a little later than we typically get it. So if you're getting some more confusion than normal, when you, I think it was quite a bit, and I wasn't sure when the right time to bring that up was, but.
I'll also add the material is not exactly the same as what you're showing
And
on the
it's,
screen.
yeah, there were some differences, yeah.
And a late breaking email with updates.
Right.
Also that too.
And yeah, let's just pause for just a moment and let people share their thoughts about that, because I know I'm not the only one. And
I guess in the interest of like the public getting the document, in a timely manner as well. I don't know if there were concerns about that too. This probably isn't even the time to bring that up, but I think it should be like, stated for the record that isn't it 5 days?
I thought it was 24 hours.
Okay.
I think that the state law says 24 hours, so I think they've still plenty of margin to adhere to state law, but of course, that's the bare minimum, and we want a robust discussion, and I'm sure there's lots of reasons why that all went down, but it did make it hard for us to bring meaningful feedback, and so I wanted to let you go through your presentation, but kind of tipping my hand of what I was maybe going to share later, depending on how the conversation went. We may not be able to get as far with the feedback that we would like to give this evening because we got everything, a fairly dense and a high volume of dense material dropped at a later than normal date. And so like for me, I was involved in a busier than normal training program, and I had Saturday afternoon set aside to review the materials. And then I went back into my training program and I had no more time to breathe. And I'm not trying to make excuses. I know things happen, but I just want to maybe kind of address the elephant in the room a little bit.
And I think that if, once it goes out, it can't change. And if you do change, then when you talk about that page, say this changed from what went out. So there's a one where you had 5 or 6 things and only 3 on the page. And I'm like, am I looking at the right presentation? So
So I got a quick question.
the same.
So the comment about the core streets of the future, I see the bicycle lane there. I get that. Core streets presently, bicycle lane is inside. It's actually can be by that parking lane and or replacing the trees. That picture is not core streets the way they are now. That picture is of core streets in the future.
Is that a question or a statement?
It's an understanding.
Oh.
That's how I see it. He just described to us that the core streets are gonna be like that picture in.
That's what I'm thinking too, is that nothing is designed like that.
That's what I see for the future. That's not the, when he flipped up that map and said, these are core streets, I'm going. They don't look like that.
No. So, Thomas, bear with us here for a minute. This is not our day job, so sometimes it takes us a little while. I do think it might be worth just reminding us, we're talking about what will ultimately be in the code so that when new streets are built by either the city or as part of a development agreement or a permit by somebody building even new streets. And so in fact, I'm not even so sure that some of those might actually not exist yet, right? I don't mean this, I don't mean this design, but I mean the street itself.
Yes.
And so to be clear, what we're talking about is then going forward, the street would need to be built to that spec, but we're not talking about going backwards.
Yeah, my understanding, this is the planning. In the future, this is what we want
Well,
the
this
street
is
to
what
be.
we, this is what, well, it's,
But
but it's actually gonna be in code. This is the code, the development code.
Policy.
No, they wanna align this to the Title 18.
True.
Maybe somebody can, in very plain language, explain, just to make sure we're all on the same page about, I mean, these look like planning documents, but they ultimately will be in Title 18, and they will therefore be in the municipal code. So when someone, either the city or someone else building a street would have to build to the standard by code. Is that correct?
Yeah, so to clarify, these would be in the Public Works Street Standards, so pulled out of Title 18. It is, we acknowledge it's a very, it's a spaghetti mess because everything is like not where they should be, but the attempt is to clarify where things need to go and make it a lot easier to find. And I'll pass over to Minnie.
Maybe.
You all hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, good to see everyone. I know I haven't attended one of your commissions, but it's you have an important role with the transportation. So real quickly, in terms of why we're here and where these will live. Currently, as you all know, we're doing the Title 18 code update, and we have street standards sprinkled throughout Title 18. So they're in one section, they're slightly different in the other section. And then we have these public works street standards, which are not in Title 18, but in Title 13, I believe. So it's still in Issaquah Municipal Code, but they're not in one location. So if someone comes in to build a building, we have to go look for what the zoning is, what does it say in Title 18, how does it match up or doesn't match up with the street standards that are in public works. So it takes us a while to kind of figure out, okay, what exactly are the frontage improvements that are required as part of this development. So that's one issue we're trying to solve. The other one is, Central Issaquah plan had these typologies, and these were the roads that were laid out. So as Thomas explained, since then, a lot of work went into that your commission worked on, and council approved the mobility master plan, the park strategic plan, and the complete streets policy. So now is an opportunity to put it in one place and also to align those different pieces. But yes, it will be part of an adopted code, but it'll be in one location. That's sort of the intent here. And there's also not an intent to significantly change what went through a public process with the Central Issaquah plan. So that was a large planning effort of, establishing these street grid and breaking up the mega blocks to make it a more walkable, sustainable community. Those goals are still being folded in. Some of the feedback that we're asking from you today is, do we want to make the bike lanes 6 feet, or is it okay to leave them 5 feet because that's what at the time was? But it does add more, it does use up more street frontage. So that's one of the questions. The location of the bike lanes, it was within the travel way. We've learned a few things since that time, and relocating it to provide a buffer is in one of these options. There's another option as you go down the list of the Parkway Street, I believe, where it's shown in a slightly different location. So you all can debate whether it makes sense to do it that way or keep that same idea of having the bike lane separated by a landscaping strip. So, but these typologies do exist in Central Issaquah. Now, outside of Central Issaquah, some of the default stuff is going to be the functional classification that Thomas was talking about. So arterial, principal arterial, and local streets and so on. So it's not taking the central typologies and putting them throughout the city. It's really looking at keeping the central planning effort in place, taking a look at some of the other corridor studies that the city is doing for Gilman and for Newport to Sunset that you all have probably been briefed on, and what do those corridors that are more site specific things that the city's looked at, how do we type those, how do we type anything outside, to have those as the functional. So that's sort of the overall picture, but the lot of details I think are in terms of what these three typologies are. So if you could just focus on, what are the three typologies that, and then we can go back and kind of explain what's changing and where they are. So this is true travel lanes with on-street parking on both sides. That was sort of and bike lanes and sidewalks, and that was sort of the planning that led from Central Issaquah plan. I mean, those exist. They're just called something, a slightly different. And I think you have a slide, Thomas, that kind of shows the arrows that point out to what they're called now in Central, to what maybe perhaps if you can show that, that might help. The delta change isn't significant. It's kind of keeping the same intent, but it's standardizing and bringing it the best practices of what the city's learned through the other planning efforts like the mobility master plan and park strategic plan. Happy to answer any questions. I'm, and curious to hear your conversation. But to address your question, we don't want to rush you through. If you need another meeting to kind of go through this, we can certainly schedule another meeting.
Thank you. I think you answered some of the questions. I think now we've kind of laid out a little bit more of, I think we can consume a little bit more of what Thomas has to share. So that's really helpful. I think we should go ahead and let him continue, but I just want to kind of make a note that just keep in mind as you're presenting that we just don't have the familiarity because we don't have materials in front of us and because we didn't have a lot of time to spend with them. So just wherever you can help ground this as you're going through it, it would be helpful. And examples are really helpful.
Okay, great. Yeah, I do apologize. We will not be tardy again. Cool. So yeah, just to sort of go back here. So this is the core street type. Sort of talked about that. So the big differences here are, again, adding 1 foot to the bike lane on each, and then adding 1 foot to the travel lane, and that just accommodates buses, and it gives bikes more space, and it makes their cycling significantly more comfortable. So those two things really improve on the multi-mobility of a core street, and so that's why we're hoping in this proposal to add that. The net result is adding 4 feet, which is wider. And in this proposal, it would just be a 4 foot wider street. So the second type is called parkways, and pause here and show this map again. So parkways are the green. So I believe this is Maple, this is Gilman. So these are the parkways. So with a parkway, oh. Did somebody have a question? No. Okay, great. So with parkways, the priority is more about moving vehicles and transit mobility. So these are connections between Interstate 90 and other state routes to provide regional connections. Parkways have the highest capacity of all the facilities within the Issaquah network, and these vehicles would be traveling at higher speeds. Parkways should be controlled for access, so sort of as we think about that other functional classification system, parkways would be sort of higher on that, moving more traffic. And we would have less access to driveways along this type. So the key elements of a parkway include a 5-lane cross section with a median and turn lanes at intersections. These are to separate vehicles that are traveling different speeds. People walking would be accommodated with sidewalks with the landscape buffer. Cyclists would have their own bike lane. Crosswalks would be limited to intersections, and the parkways would have transit supportive elements. And again, so this is that new proposed parkway. And the parkway is comparable to the boulevard typology found in Central Issaquah Plan. I'm not trying to add to the confusion here, but one of the things we're changing is boulevards in Central Issaquah used to be called parkways. So just making it clear that when you look at attachment A, the packet, the boulevards, which is the bullet G, is equivalent to this parkway design. So just making that clear, and I apologize for the confusion. It's a lot. So changing the name is just consistent with transportation engineering best practices. So that's just for apples to apples comparison. Just look at the type G for this. So in comparing the citywide street typology, this design would widen the bike lane again, so a 6 foot wide bike lane, and also add a 3 foot buffer between cyclists and cars. And this just adds it's essentially a protected bike lane for this. The other thing, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Question on this one. I mean, if I'm at an intersection, I've got 55, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 60, 72 feet to cross from where the tree is to the other side. That's a long space, that's a long cycle of the light. And does the median need to be 11 feet or 5 feet? But it just seems like, unless they're both out at the curbs at the intersection so that the actual crossing distance is less. But then you kind of break up the bike lane going continuously through.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Oh, if I may, this cross section would be sort of like a straight shot. So the idea is that because parkways are meant for vehicles traveling at higher speeds, you wouldn't necessarily want a mid-block crossing, which would be more dangerous for pedestrians to cross. So you can consider this as just being like in the middle of a long stretch. This is what it would look like. And that center area, that the median you're describing is, it would be landscaping, but it would also serve as a break for left turning vehicles so that you don't have a rear end situation.
right, okay.
I have a similar concern generally. I know we're not getting to the discussion, but these look like long crossings. And so that's something throughout. I guess I'm kind of curious about the trade-offs that you discussed that you went through to get to this recommendation and what some of the pros and cons of these choices that you're recommending have been in the discussions and so forth.
Yeah, that's a great question. And how I would answer that is parkways are really going to be on areas that are not pedestrian heavy. So, like East Sam, not a whole lot of commercial activity, like with high density. These are really corridors where a lot of traffic are going through. So we would want to incentivize pedestrians to use the intersections that are already there. That would be a more protected situation. And you wouldn't want pedestrians darting across the street on an already super wide street. So.
Sorry, for East Lake Sammamish, especially during like the summer, is that a concern? People trying to get to the
Don't ask
park?
me. No, go ahead and ask, but like, first, wondering why you're directing it at me.
For East Lake Sammamish, is that not a concern for folks trying to get to the park? I guess if like parking is really backed up or they're walking across, I don't know if that happens, I guess, like, I don't know if that's a hypothetical.
It looks like Dave has a comment and I might have another comment, but go ahead. Do you have something on your mind?
So my confusion is, I know what East Lake Sammamish Parkway looks like right now. It doesn't look like this.
Right.
So we're now saying that the new standard is gonna be that East Lake Sammamish Parkway is gonna look like this. And do we know what year we've got it set to look like this?
Or is there a 2-lane option for an arterial?
No, I see some things. I mean, I get it. East Lake Sammamish Parkway, it's close, because on the southbound side, you got the bike trail, okay? You've got that buffer in there, no problem. But on the parkway with the transit stop, the present East Lake Sammamish Parkway does not look like this. No, nor will it. So I've got to believe that that's the standard we're trying to get to. So do we have a date we're focusing on when East Lake Sammamish Parkway or all of our parkways will look like the standard?
To answer that question, we do not have a date. These are more high-level planning documents. Any changes, if approved as as is or whatever.
It's something we want to be standard in the city because they don't look like that now. But yet they have a name, Parkway.
So, sorry, you're using the term planning document, but I thought we were talking about code, so this will be embedded in the
You're
code.
getting my confusion.
So a developer who wants to get a permit for a big section of this road would then have to improve the road as part of their development agreement. That would be in code. So when you say high-level planning document, I get really confused.
Yeah, to clarify, so, and I want to make it clear that some of these roads don't exist yet. So the alignments may change. And so we're not literally saying, you know, this road exists and this is the type that it needs to be. If it does exist, then that is the requirement that we would overlay on top of that. But for roads that don't exist, the alignment, you know, may be different, but the general flavor is that this is where it should go and this is what it would be.
Alignment and standard are not the same thing. Regardless of where it's aligned, you're saying it would have to look like this. And I know some of these roads don't exist, but some do. So I feel like am I the only one that's getting
No.
confused? Okay.
That's why I called it a.
My belief is that East Lake Sammamish Parkway exists, but it doesn't exist like in the picture. It kind of does. It's probably 3/4 of the way there, but it doesn't. And especially if you add that as a transit parkway, along with being the parkway it is. I think that's gonna cause confusion to the residents of the city of Issaquah. Because I'm gonna go down East Lake Sammamish Parkway. The vision of East Lake Sammamish Parkway or the real thing, you know what I mean? That's what I'm trying to say. There's confusion there. And we've got to be able to talk about, that's the standard we want to get to, correct? That's the standard you want us to have. We don't have that now. And you're right. As we look at those don't exist. Gilman Boulevard is not a parkway yet, nor is it even close. Well, it is on one side. That's the confusion I'm getting.
So that's one part of the confusion, and I share that, but I also think there's a little bit of a confusion. And I know you can't put a timeline to it if it's in the code and it's a standard that has to be adhered to. It would be triggered by some kind of development agreement, some kind of development permit, that would be a requirement that the street standard be brought up to this. And so, of course, you don't know, you can't predict when those permit applications are gonna come in, when someone's gonna wanna develop. Maybe the state will wanna redo the state park and they'll have to adhere to these standards when they apply for their permit. And so I wouldn't expect you to know when, but I do have I'm also a little bit confused about, because these parcels are all gonna be owned by they're gonna be developed by different developers, like, how does it work? So I think we're a little confused about the process overall, and I think you could probably help us get unconfused. And I want to make sure that we get to the salient points that you guys have wrestled with, that you thought that the board would have the most input. But I think without some of this overall understanding of how it would be used, it's a little bit hard to get to that point. And I'm kind of keep looking at Christy because she works with a large property owner that would be likely to have to be implementing a specific standard. And I'm wondering, I'm worried about patchwork. So that's the thing.
Maybe let's let John speak to it.
Thank you.
He's got his hand up.
Oh, John. Okay, sorry. I cannot see those hands. Thank you, John. Go ahead.
No problem. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how it would be used, and I think East Lake Sammamish Parkway is the perfect example because in 2016, the city developed a portion of East Lake Sammamish Parkway to the boulevard standard at the time. Now, there were a few exceptions to it in order to preserve wetland, but if you're driving on East Lake Sammamish Parkway from Southeast 56th almost to the Issaquah Falls City Road, you'll basically see the Central Issaquah Boulevard on the west side of the road for southbound traffic, where we have the two southbound lanes, we have the center turn lane, an occasional median, and then we have the bike lane, a planter strip, and the sidewalk, except for in some areas where we didn't because of the trying to preserve wetlands. And so that, I guess I want to first go through how it would get used and then talk about the change. So then, considering that with the exception of the buffer area, that East Lake Sammamish Parkway through that section is basically built to that section, let's say, and sometime in the future, the shopping mall where Fred Meyer is were to redevelop, and all of a sudden they were to put in a bunch of mixed use, I don't know how tall the buildings could be, but tall buildings, mixed use, a lot more density. Then they would be responsible for developing the frontage on their side, and they would build to that section. So right now, if you're walking on the sidewalk on the Fred Meyer side, there's no planter strip. There is a painted bike lane, but they would be required to have a protected or buffered bike lane, which would be consistent with the mobility master plan vision for having a LT level of traffic stress 2 or greater bike facility within Central Issaquah. They would then have a landscape planter strip and then the sidewalk, and they would be responsible for building that. And then if in the future the property on the north side of Southeast 56, also along East Lake Sammamish Parkway, were to redevelop, they would continue that section. And so it'd get built like that. And at the same time, the city could also do projects to fill in gaps. So maybe, let's say, we have a good section of Parkway built, but there's a gap in between, and there's no real good connection for bicyclists or pedestrians. That could become a city capital project to build out the vision of having the connections for the bicycles and pedestrians, as well as the vehicles that we want within the city in the future. And I guess I'll just stop here and see if, did that help clear up things?
Can I add to what you just shared, John, a little bit? Maybe you can correct me if
Yes.
I'm wrong. But the way I'm looking at the materials that have been presented to us, they are the street standards. It's also something that came out of the vision of the Central Issaquah plan. What the city needs is the tools by way of the standards and Title 13 in order to start to incrementally meet that long-range plan and that vision. And without having this, when a parcel develops, the city doesn't have any recourse to get there. But we're looking at, like, if you think about all of the plans that they took to get to this, we're looking kind of like at the bottom of the funnel. So this is the output, but there's also tools that the city has in its cadre of things to work with that could help facilitate this happening faster or in a streamlined approach, whether that it becomes part of the city's capital improvement plan, or say the neighbors get together, the city approaches a certain neighborhood in town and says, let's do an LID together, where everyone signs on to say, yeah, we want to see the road improved, because ultimately that's going to help the neighborhood and that's going to help our development. And an example of that happened a long time ago was Mall Street. You know, it didn't have any sidewalks, didn't have any on-street parking, but 60% of the neighborhood said, yes, absolutely, we want to have a street standard that is something conducive to the neighborhood. And so everyone pitched in to help pay for that. And then I think the city also has the option to do transportation improvement districts. So it's kind of, you have to look at it in terms of what's the typology, and then there's all these other tools that the city then could utilize to help make that come to fruition.
So I think I appreciate that. I think I was getting confused because you were talking about it being a long-range plan, but what you're saying is it's going to take a long time to implement this because it's going to be done incrementally, because it's attached to development permits, and so hopefully that clarifies your confusion.
It does, but I got another hand grenade to throw in.
Okay.
And I think these are important. John, you know that I'm really an avid transit guy, right? So if you take East Lake Sammamish Parkway, okay? I loved it when I saw that you go down East Lake Sammamish Parkway now, you don't have one transit stop on East Lake Sammamish Parkway. Our seniors need those. They need to be able to get around by transit. And I know that's a big problem. I get it. But better for us to talk about that now so that we make sure that that stays in that design criteria somewhere. Every one of those parkways that I saw on that map, very few of them have transit stops. And we need to make sure that our ADA people, our seniors, and people who depend on transit have that access and not just rule it out. So I know that was a hand grenade, but I needed to get it in there.
I also just want to real quickly, I think this is super, super important, and I feel like you haven't even had the opportunity to really get to some of the questions that you put up at the very beginning. But I'm looking at the time is 7:40, and I want to just say that I kind of came into this with that pretty big volume of material, and I kind of quickly looked over the schedule and looked at to see that I was supposed to go to the M&I committee in December, and I'm just wondering, and I know this has to get, I can understand the urgency to get it wrapped up with the Title 18 stuff, but I'm just wondering if, I don't think we're going to be able to get to a place where we feel really good about making a recommendation for that M&I committee meeting just in the next, short little bit here. Partly because I just don't think we had quite enough time to come fully prepared. But I don't want to continue to harp on that and dwell on that. I do want to move forward and let you present your content. But I just kind of wanted to introduce that notion, and let's, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Let's keep making progress here, but recognize that it might not all get done at the timeline, or at least I personally don't feel like we can put together a great, a vetted recommendation at the end of this meeting in time for the December Mobility Infrastructure Committee meeting. And I just want to kind of throw that out there. Go ahead.
Just a quick one. I think the way the typologies are displayed are great.
I know, we
That's
haven't
a
gotten to the
wonderful-
content yet.
That's a wonderful thing, but we're not even close to that. But I jumped ahead and looked at streets, slow streets. Dogwood's a slow street. And I looked at the design of it's pretty darn close on the slow streets as to what that typology is. But the parkways are a long ways away.
So I
So do
think,
we want to let them go through?
yeah, I
the
think we
presentation
should
and
we should definitely
at least
let
go
you
through it
carry
and give
on.
us some things to think about.
Right.
Because right now we've had a lot of discussion, but haven't got anywhere. So
Yes.
maybe we just let them finish the
100%. I was exactly headed the same place. Go ahead, Thomas. Thank you for your patience.
time check also. Just, you got 40 minutes? Or 20 minutes?
All right. Yeah. Okay. So I think what I would said last time. So, with the parkway, so this is just like a typical parkway. Again, it would be adding 1 foot to the bike lane, adding a 3-foot protection for cyclists. This is just to protect cyclists between moving vehicles. And then we would be, from the existing standards, we would be reducing the turn lane or landscaping area to make it just big enough for what is needed So it used to be 12 and now we're proposing 11. So as we sort of look at where this would be applicable, I showed the map previously, but this would be mostly in central. So the net result in central would be that the streets would be about 7 foot wider with this new design, just to better align central's design with multimodal goals. And then outside of central, this typology would be applicable to Issaquah Pine Lake Road. Just for like a just within the segment that is within the city, and then just to note that this that road currently follows the functional classification system for a principal arterial roadway. So the right of way is there, and it would be fine in terms of right of way. So along fixed points where there are transit stops, this is the proposal. So to fit in a transit shelter, we would be asking for basically 1 foot more for each bike lane. We would be taking away, and I'll toggle through this previous one. So we would be taking away this buffer at that one point, which would not be necessary because the transit shelter would act as protection from the travel lane. So it'd be essentially 20 feet wider in that one section where there is a transit stop. And so in central, the net result would be, obviously 21 feet in that one section, and then outside of central, within the one section of Issaquah Pine Lake Road, that would also be about 21 feet wider than what is standard within the parkway. And the third type, which is the slow streets. Slow streets primarily serve low-density residential areas and quiet business districts. Slow streets prioritize walking and biking above all other modes and have posted speed limits of around 20 to 25 miles per hour. There would also be some traffic calming elements such as edge lane striping. We have potentially some raised crosswalks, some bulb outs at intersections like what was talked about previously, or what was mentioned by some board members, and then traffic circles. So the feel of the road would be much slower. It would be more, smaller scale. For vehicular traffic, streets would include 2 narrow drive lanes with optional on-street parking to serve for access to adjacent land uses. And vehicle storage would also be one of the added benefits. Slower streets, slow streets would have reduced traffic speeds, so the necessity for bike lanes would be minimal. So cyclists would share the road with cars that are traveling much slower, and so it'd be very comfortable for cyclists, for pedestrians, and there'd be sidewalks and landscaping. And this is what the slow street looks like. And when comparing the slow street to what is already planned for central Issaquah, slow streets are comparable to 2 of the typologies within central Issaquah, which are the neighborhood streets and the pedestrian priority street types. It's also important to note, and this was included in the memo, for central Issaquah, the 2 street types that were called out, which are equivalent to this, they never actually noted where these streets would go. So in the map, you can see these like grayed out streets, and it's unclear what would happen for those. So with this new iteration, as we're trying to improve upon what we have previously, we're hoping to distinguish slow streets as its own thing, and just make sure that we call out specifically where these would go. For neighborhood streets in central Issaquah, landscaping was provided to the right, and for pedestrian priority streets, landscaping was provided to the left. And so this is just sort of a subtle difference where this used to go and where it is now. So the net difference is nothing. They're exactly the same width, and that's for the slow street typology. And yeah, so this is pretty much like one for one. And here's a cross section for the same type with on-street parking. So in central Issaquah, this would be about 2 feet wider. The previous standard was a 7-foot park lane, and 8 foot is more comfortable for parked vehicles. So that is the difference there. And I will just go back to this map here for clarification of where those are proposed. That is not the right map.
Yeah, it's not. The orange.
We go through here. Yeah, so this is that map. So slow streets would go on these 5 streets. And it was noted by the public that there was not a break here in Holly, so we've made that distinction. So I'll just keep cruising through if that's okay. If we're good on.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. So, we've talked about, core streets, parkways, and slow streets. There's also streets that don't fall into those neat buckets, and we have here corridor-specific streets. So that's this top one right here. These are streets with pre-existing context-specific corridor plans that have been developed by the city. These are plans that are either have been developed or will be in the very near future. This type encapsulates streets within central Issaquah that were previously called parkways. The functional classification streets that we have here is just the default. So that's the type that I talked about previously that the city develops with the state. So those are state mandated, and they're just the default design. And yeah, going back to that map, so this purple represents corridor specific plans that have been developed. So we have Westlake Sam, we have Newport, there's one for Front Street. And then, yeah, going through all these, there's, core streets, parkways, slow streets, and the functional classification system, which is the default. So I think this has been blown out of the water, but next steps, feedback shared with the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. We're happy to do that at a time that makes sense. We want to make sure that we get your feedback, which is obviously super important. So we'll work with whatever timeline we need. After the board provides feedback, we're going to give that to the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. And then all cumulative feedback will be informed with the final adoption of the street standards. And so I just wanted to address, with my last couple of minutes here, I wanted to address some public comments that we've received to date. So again, I mentioned previously in the map that there was not a break in Holly Street where there should be. So we've updated that to be 2 distinctive segments. We also received concerns about potentially widening the street to increase impervious surface. The city plans to conduct a SEPA, which stands for State Environmental Policy Act. So there's a SEPA checklist which would be used to verify if there's any significant environmental considerations for this. So we would be conducting that, but we would also want to explore potentially other options that don't include widening the road. So if that is something that the board is interested in, we would be interested in doing that as well. We also received a comment about the intersection spacing on the parkways, which is greater than that of the comparable central Issaquah typology. So this was an error on our part. It was a miscommunication. So it will be changed back to what it should be, which is a intersection spacing of less than 800 feet. So it was a good catch, just something that we missed, but that will be fixed. Fourth comment that we received was related to a development agreement with the Raleigh property. So development agreements are, as what was mentioned by John previously, legally binding, and so the agreements that are between the developer and the city would be, honored for that. So just wanted to share that it wasn't noted on the map, but development agreements are not typically shown on maps. They're just, legal documents that are that will be applied, just are not typically shown on typology maps. And so this is just an example of a development agreement for the Raleigh property. So there are existing street classifications that are specific to those properties, and those would be acknowledged through through the document that is created. So just wanted to make that clear that these street typologies don't supersede development agreements. Development agreements are good through the duration of the agreement. So I came here for some direction. I'm not sure how much we can get in the time that we have, but I'd love to pass it over to the chair, and I'm happy to receive any feedback that you have for me tonight.
Okay, well, thank you, Thomas. I know there's a lot of material here, and I'm sure you guys have been working really hard to develop all this. And I also want to compliment you on the, I think it's really above and beyond and quite helpful to go through, to address the public comments. So that was actually really helpful. We have obviously some very engaged people that can catch things. So good job on that. I'm not quite sure what the best use of the time is. I'm particularly interested. I'm glad I see that this slide is a little different than the one that was in our packet, and I appreciate that it's got some very specific questions that I didn't think were in the original packet. And I think one of the things that let's see, it's there's a lot to take in here, and I'm kind of just trying to strategize about how to use our time the best. But I'm wondering about specifics like item 2. I think it's very big question, 1A and B, and I think we obviously need the overview, and we need to make sure that we're thinking at the strategic level and looking at these documents and making sure they're aligned. I think that's a really, really important question, but it's kind of a big question. But then of course then there's implementation, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And I like the concreteness of question 2. Maybe I'd like to ask, and maybe we can get, it looks like Andrea. I bet Andrea has something really useful to share as I sit here in the hot seat struggling with what to do exactly next. Andrea, go ahead, please. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So given that it's 7:56, and I know that you like to run a very punctual meeting and we want to respect everyone's time, I have a suggestion for how to use the remainder of your time today, and that might be, I heard a lot of questions tonight. I know that you need more time with materials. As Thomas said, we are more than happy to give you the time that you need. We knew this was a complicated item when we brought it to you. So I would suggest, what information would be helpful for Thomas to bring back to you at your next tab meeting so that you can have this discussion of these questions and provide the guidance? So is there information that you're missing, or do you just need a little bit more time? I guess those would be my two questions for you, and then we can prepare that information for you and come back at the next regular tab meeting.
Thank you, Andrea. That's a great question. I have one, but I'm going to open it up to the group to see if you have anything that you would like to ask him to not so much address now, but prepare and then deliver back to us.
I have a question. Is at our next meeting, do we want to be prepared to answer these questions? And is that this by maybe having an update packet that has any changes in it, but reviewing that on our own and then being able to come back and have the discussion and be able to answer these questions at the next meeting?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm hearing, and I know personally, I just didn't have enough time, so I think the first thing is maybe not a lot of new information, but mostly just more time. And then the other thing I was just gonna say is I wish I had a little more insight into some of the discussion that maybe the points that you guys, either administration or the consultant, kind of, what were some of your things that you wrestled over a little bit? I think that's always really helpful to us. And what were some of the things that really kind of boiled down to values and policies that then, these decisions, like the 5 versus 6 feet for bike lanes, what were some of the, I'd like to hear some of the kind of pros and cons of some of these things. Is maybe sharing us a little bit with your process of how you got to that spot is really, really helpful for advisory board members, I think. I'm getting lots of nods. Looks like Christine has something to say.
Well, I'm waffling back and forth whether it's appropriate to ask or not, but I recall when the initial planning was being prepared for Gilman Boulevard, one of the things the city was missing or that needed to happen was to understand what the right-of-way was on both sides. And so I'm curious if in the analysis of fair and peers, if that was a factor that got included, because we also don't want to create challenges for ourselves in trying to make something bigger that can't necessarily come to fruition.
That's a great point.
Yeah, you can't buy the right of way. It's too expensive.
Yeah, and then the city's in a headache situation and just doesn't. I see, John, you turned your camera on. Do you have something to share?
So for Gilman, starting next year, we're planning on recontinuing the work that we did a few years ago that you were referencing to come up with a preferred concept. And what we didn't want was for a development to come in on Gilman between now and when that work was done. And so we wanted to have some section. So we just went with the Parkway section, but the plan is to define it better with a more detailed study.
Will that become similar to Lake Sammamish Parkway in the future?
Like Sammamish Parkway?
Yes.
I don't know.
You don't have to answer it now. Just curious.
I do have one other question, but I don't.
I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Question number 4, seems like you're asking, should we start all over again? Because most of the changes are widening, and the question 4 suggests, do we want to see options that don't involve widening? And isn't that what it looked like before? So help me understand why number 4 isn't starting over again. That's a good question.
Yeah, I can answer that. So, considering that right-of-way is expensive, we do want to be mindful of the width of the road. So there may be options to still meet our objectives, which are to improve mobility for all different travel modes, walking, biking, taking the bus, driving. There could be still options for making that happen while not significantly widening the road. So if that is something that the board is interested in, we could look at alternative options.
I'd like to know more about that, but I don't want to send anybody, I don't think our recommendation would be go develop a bunch of options where you spend a bunch of consultant money and take 3 more months.
Right.
So I think, of course we want to see options. Why wouldn't we want to see options? But we don't have a very good sense of what we're asking for if we asked for that. So maybe you could help us with that a little bit. In other words, how strongly do we feel? Because that seems, we just don't have a sense yet. Go ahead, Dave.
So number 3 would be pretty easy for me to answer right now, but then Christie threw in her hand grenade, which was the right-of-way issue. If we don't have the right-of-way issue to add that in there, it becomes a moot question. Because I would love to see those bike lanes in there, and I already know you would too, but if we don't have the right of way, we're not gonna see the bike lanes in there.
It's almost like the option has to be, what can we fit within the existing right of way on the existing arterials? And what would be the 2 or 3 key things that we want to build in that? If we have room to do 4, 5, and 6, we can do it, but if we don't, then here's 1, 2, 3 that we really want within the existing right of way. That's gonna be realistic, that we can build.
Which brings back to the bigger question of, on all the questions, we've got to know that space. If we don't know that space, answering those questions may be moot.
If we're building a brand new town,
Easy
there's no right of way, then we can do those, but the reality is, we have to build within the existing right of way. We might be able to take a foot here or a couple of feet here, slivers, but can't be taking 21 feet or 12 feet or 10 feet along a long stretch of road. It's prohibitive.
So I think that number 4 is just kind of almost on a street by street basis. Because due to the.
Block by block,
Mm-hmm.
even. That's a really good point. I mean, if you go ahead, Isabel.
No, I was just gonna say that it looks like Mimi would like to share something.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead, Minnie.
We've rendered.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it's not going back to the drawing board. So the options, if it's not, we're gonna send the consultant off to create 5 different options and then evaluate them. One example, I think, is where we had the side, the bike lanes and a 3-foot buffer from the drive lane. We could revert that back to the core street section where you have your sidewalk, your bike lane, and your landscaping. So that eliminates 3 feet on both sides, so it's 6 foot less. So one of the other things that you all were discussing was how long does it take a pedestrian to cross the street? So I think we can take some of that feedback from your discussion today and maybe bring a couple of more options that isn't going back to the drawing board, but then have pros and cons for your next meeting to evaluate those options. I think that'll be helpful for you to look at that. And then maybe the same thing for the bike lanes, the pros and cons of 5 to 6 feet. What are the best practices and why one is better than the other? But we can give you 2 cross sections, one with 5 foot and another one with the 6 foot. And, then you can visually see both and make a recommendation on those 2. So it's not a huge ask. It's not going to send us to the drawing board. So I think for number 2 and number 4, we can produce some more options and pros and cons for your discussion.
I think that would be great. I think what would be really ideal is if we all had the time to spend on question one, and then maybe we bring back a discussion about that. But hopefully, we've been in lockstep, with the mobility master plan, and hopefully the answer will be yes, and we can move along. I think if the answer is no, we can't get to the second half of it. But if we can, maybe in the next meeting, and I don't know what I forget what the rest of the meeting schedule is for next month, but we could maybe ideally quickly get through that higher level question that is necessary but not sufficient, and then move to these specifics, which is, what we love to do is roll our sleeves up and get into this. So yes, more options, I think would be helpful, and more time for question 1A and B, I think is where we stand at this time. Does that capture about where we are, guys? Okay.
I just haven't seen him come up. Micah hasn't.
I know, I'm dying to hear what Micah has to say, and because there's a slide taking most of the screen, we don't get to see we're not seeing Micah's face, so.
He left the meeting, yeah.
Oh, he had to leave the meeting, gotcha, okay.
Is David Kapler still there?
Yes.
Are you asleep, David, or are you still here?
He can't talk back.
He's not, it's not on our board, yeah. But we do definitely appreciate being here. So with that, I think that we should go ahead and wrap up this topic for now. Knowing that, recognizing it's very important, we want to provide thoughtful feedback that we feel like we've been thorough. And we appreciate your patience, and I'm sure you're working really hard to get all this material. It's very dense, and I definitely had the sense that it was more challenging maybe than you had expected, and I'm sure it's not for lack of trying, so we do appreciate your work.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you everyone. Yeah, thank you everyone for your time. We will come back with more time for you. We'll provide pros and cons, so you'll be able to hit the ground running for the next meeting.
Maybe you could go ahead and it sounds like maybe question one, we don't need any new information. Could you just confirm that? We'll just take some more time to dig in on our own time.
Yeah, that one's ready to go.
And then you guys can spend more of your providing some of those options and filling in with some of the pros and cons. Isabel, were you gonna? So I think that closes item 4B. Isabel, did you have something else you wanted to add on item 4B before we move on? No. Okay.
But also a time check what we need to.
Yeah, it's time to wrap up. It's already a little after 8. Dave.
I'd like to move that we adjourn.
Second the motion.
We don't adjourn by motion here, and what I am hearing you say is you want to leave, and I think that we should take.
It's going to be a necessary leave here because it doesn't go pretty soon.
We do, and I'm usually fairly, I just want to make sure that there's nothing, if we could take 60 seconds and then everybody sprint for the door, how about that?
Yes, I would only share that, yes, we are going to come back with, just to confirm that we're going to come back to the top of this topic. And just really quick, in appreciation of your service, we have gift bags. If you do not get the chance to go to the summer event that the gift bags were given, I have them here for you. And also your chair or vice chair pin. If you have served at any time during any other board or commission as a chair or vice chair, I have pins for you.
Is that this board or?
Any other board in Issaquah, yes.
Okay.
So yes, you qualify, David.
I served on the cemetery board. That's the board everybody was dying to get on.
You can wait.
Do you have any objection to adjourning the meeting? Okay, I am adjourning, declaring this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely are a little
Night,
over,
everyone.
but, good night.
Can't see their faces, but.
I was just gonna say,